Buckle up and get ready to take a journey through the top 100 action movies from the 1990s. It was a jammed-packed decade of films from all genres, but there was no shortage of action flicks. The first half of the decade was filled with nods to the prototypical action formula of the 80s, and with the advancements of technology during the back half of the decade, action movies would get bigger and more ambitious than ever. I've done my best to comb through all the action movies from the decade. I've narrowed it down to my top 100 picks. Now, I'm not going to be including some films. I'm not going to be including disaster films or westerns for the most part, as well as war movies or pure adventure flicks like Jurassic Park. I wanted to keep this list down to more straight up action movies. So let's get this massive list started with the first 10 films, numbers 100 through 91. Kicking this list off at number 100 is an unintentionally comical action thriller starring a retired NFL Hall of Famer who fought fire with fire. Not exactly sure what that means, but it was the tagline of 1998's Firestorm, starring Howie Long as a smoke jumper, as well as Scott Glenn and William Forsythe, as well as a shit ton of digital fire. Now, critically, this isn't the best of films by any means, but I think it's a straightforward action thriller that really sticks to the basics and delivers just enough fun wilderness excitement. Howie Long was given a shot by Hollywood, and he isn't too bad. He's not that great, but he does fit the physicality of this film nicely. The gimmicky action of this smoke jumper using his firefighting skills like chainsaws and axes to fend off a group of criminals on the run is a bit cheesy and it's a bit cliche, but that's also part of the fun, I think, and William Forsythe certainly knew that because he just goes all in on his portrayal of the villain in this film. Firestorm is certainly simple, and most of the fire effects don't hold up so well all these years later, but the stunt work and the practical action does, and the performances aren't too bad for this era of generic action romps. We're going back in time to 1991 for my number 99 pick, but we're going to stick with the retired football player theme, as Brian Bosworth would play an undercover cop who enforced his own brand of justice and who was so slick he would burn you cold. You gotta love taglines from the 80s and 90s. This, of course, is the biker-themed action romp Stone Cold, also starring genre legend Lance Henriksen and William Forsythe once again. Now, Brian the Boz Bosworth was a very good football player for the Seattle Seahawks, but at the time, he was a great personality with his bleached mullet and his edgy attitude. He also looked like a prototypical 80s action star as well, with his hulking vanity muscles, so it was inevitable he would get a shot in Hollywood, and to his credit, I think he made the most of it. Stone Cold is a by-the-numbers undercover action thriller, but Bosworth holds his own as he's kicking ass and dropping one-liners and caring for his pet dragon. William Forsythe shows up again, and Lance Henriksen, to provide the film with a couple of solid villains, and despite the action being a bit generic, there is a ton of it, and it gives the film a steady pace with plenty of excitement to have fun with. Now, I know I said I wasn't really going to include westerns into this list, but despite the theme, my number 98 movie feels more like an action flick than a traditional western, and that would be 1990's Young Guns, where the regulators would reunite for one last ride, led by Emilio Estevez, Christian Slater, Lou Diamond Phillips, and Kiefer Sutherland. Young Guns is filled with a great ensemble cast and tons of personality, led by Emilio Estevez, who is just soaking up every scene in this movie. It's filled with bravado and quotable lines and strong performances, but it's also loaded with a lot of gunfights and other adrenaline-pumping action set pieces that I think make it feel much more like a Western-themed action from 1990 with a total 80s vibe to kind of match the first Young Guns very well. The sequel delivers a memorable score, awesome production design, a great soundtrack, and despite its flashy action, the emotional undercurrent of the film as you make one last ride to the border with the regulators does connect you with these characters, which makes the many hurdles on their mission that much more intense. The tagline for my number 97 movie was "Get on or get out of the way," and it would pair Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson as transit cops who decide to take a fortune in 1995's Money Train, also starring a pre-J-Lo Jennifer Lopez and Chris Cooper. Now, Money Train to me kind of feels like a movie that threw a lot of ideas against the wall to kind of see what would stick. You get the charm of Wesley and Woody playing foster brothers, so there's an effective balance of humor between them, and then you get the subway arsonist played by Chris Cooper, then you get Robert Blake playing this cartoonish villain that doesn't really fit in the film at all, and then you get Jennifer Lopez tossed into the mix, and then you get Woody Harrelson's gambling problems pushing him to steal the money train. So admittedly, it is a busy movie, and Wesley and Woody aren't as strong as they were in White Men Can't Jump, but I don't think it hinders this movie from being a very fun, easily consumable thriller with some laughs and an appealing blend of action and a closing that goes all out on the over-the-top suspense. Now, my number 96 pick could easily be the strangest, if not the certainly the most craziest movie on this list. It would be a movie that would star two guys who would go on to win Oscar awards. It's a virtual reality-themed sci-fi action thriller starring Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe as Sid 6.7, the ultimate killing machine, and the movie is 1995's Virtuosity. This movie is ultra cheesy, but you have to admire its ambition in trying to create something unique. It's a flawed film without question, but it's also delightfully nostalgic to go back and look at what Virtuosity showcased as cutting-edge technology. However, it's also a fast-paced sci-fi story shoehorned surprisingly well into the action thriller formula, and then you get Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe driving the entertainment factor. Both of these guys dive all in on these roles. It makes this movie a good time. Washington's a great ex-cop with an edge to him, and Crowe is just world class over the top as this virtual reality simulation that comes to life and wreaks havoc. It's really as absurd as it sounds, but the performances aren't too bad at all, and the action is effective, and this movie is just completely unordinary and completely out of the box, and that's why it's a great time. Coming in at number 95 is the first and presumably not the last of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movies that will ultimately make this list. In this one, he would go undercover into prison to seek out a killer of killers. The film is 1990's Death Warrant. After starring in two great martial arts flicks, Jean-Claude Van Damme stepped into the mainstream with his prison action flick Death Warrant. Now, admittedly, this movie does work itself down the cliche checklist, and it really doesn't bring anything incredibly new to the table, but I think it does the formula extremely well, and it has a nice balance of strong performances and gritty production design, a well-structured blend of plot layers, and Van Damme showcasing both his action ability and his on-screen charisma. It's a very well-directed film. The action, I think, is visually appealing, and the supporting cast is surprisingly strong. You got Robert Guillaume, he's very good. Art LaFleur is fantastic. He takes the typical evil warden role and really makes it his own, and Patrick Kilpatrick, I think, steals the show as Van Damme's nemesis, the Sandman. I wasn't lying, guys. Moving along to my number 94 pick is another Jean-Claude Van Damme film. This one, he plays a fugitive on the run who decides to help a small family from a group of dirty land developers, because when the law can't protect the innocent, the only hero left is an outlaw in 1993's Nowhere to Run. I certainly enjoy this movie more than most people do. It's a bit subdued for a 90s action flick from Jean-Claude Van Damme, but I think that's where the appeal does lie. Van Damme forms this surprisingly endearing charm with a young Kieran Culkin that invests you in this mission to save this family despite being a fugitive on the run. Admittedly, this is a generic action flick with a lot of plug-and-play pieces woven into it, but there's just enough of an emotional connection to the family that I think makes the film work. Joss Ackland and Ted Levine are great villains. They give Van Damme more than enough of a fight to keep the film moving. Now, I'll admit the action in this one is far from as flashy as what you're going to get in other Van Damme romps, and he doesn't deliver many of his trademark moves, but I can appreciate this deviation from his usual tendencies, and I think the movie holds up better than some of his more popular titles. Moving along to number 93 is a film about a man left behind on a desolate planet for machines and people who were deemed obsolete, where he would find one last battle to fight, and that man would be Kurt Russell, and the film would be 1998 Soldier, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. This movie, I think, is a bit forgotten. Again, it doesn't really do anything hugely unique, but I think it's a very well-structured blend of genre tropes woven into a story that is able to line itself with a surprising amount of heart. You get Russell almost feeling like this unloved dog that has so much to offer, and it creates this just naturally sympathetic connection to him that I think injects a ton of intrigue into a story that generally wouldn't have so much of that from an emotional aspect. The sci-fi elements are appealing, the world building is fun. Soldier is a movie that provides an action-packed escape with a heartfelt core that's really all cemented by the performance from Russell, that I think it gets a bit overlooked for how effective it is for the needs of this film. Admittedly, yes, Soldier does get a bit cheesy in spots and some of the effects are dated, but that's kind of all part of the nostalgia of action thrillers from the late 90s. Next up at number 92 is a forgotten gem from the writers who created Back to the Future, about a group of guys who all came to the wrong place at the wrong time, and I'm talking about 1992's Trespass from director Walter Hill, starring a fantastic ensemble cast led by Ice-T, Bill Paxton, Ice Cube, and William Sadler. This is certainly both an underrated and a hidden gem from the early 90s. It's written by Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis and directed by Walter Hill, and the result is a just well-structured and well-built action movie that has just enough moving pieces and practical action and a continual heightening of the suspense that all builds to a very satisfying closing. I think Trespass is a unique film for what it is. It's filled with tension and lots of action that's really just all built from grounded situations. It's filled with a great ensemble cast and just kick-ass characters that are badass, from the main characters down to the supporting players. Trespass also has a great soundtrack to it, but what really cements this film is its on-location shoot. The practical sets give this movie the gritty, lived-in vibe that it needs, and the direction from Hill uses this desolate playground perfectly for the needs of the story. And closing out this first cluster of 10 films at number 91 is a solid sequel to an iconic 80s flick, and it is RoboCop 2 from 1990, directed by Irvin Kershner, with Peter Weller returning as RoboCop to protect the innocent citizens of old Detroit when an evil robot is created by a rogue member of the OCP. Now, RoboCop 2 is far from the epic level of filmmaking that the first was able to accomplish, and it is missing that atmosphere of Verhoeven's '87 classic. This movie certainly tries to replicate that with waves of ultra-violence and a barrage of F-bombs, which naturally don't work because that isn't what made Verhoeven's film so fantastic. There's also a slightly trashy vibe to this movie, but it isn't all bad. Peter Weller returns as RoboCop, Nancy Allen returns as well, and they do elevate this rather uninspired plot. There's also an added level of self-awareness that doesn't really work either, but there's a lot of fun action to watch and plenty of memorable moments. RoboCop 2 was far from great, but it's more than serviceable, and I think as the years pass and more sequels and reboots hit cinemas and the small screen, RoboCop 2 has slowly gotten better considering its competition. And that closes out this video. The first cluster of 10 films are in the books. There was a little bit of it all in this episode. Let me know what you guys think of these films, and let me know what your guesses are going to be for my top 5 picks. Thank you guys all so much for watching. It's greatly appreciated. Be on the lookout for my next episode covering films 90 through 81 coming very soon. And until then, movies never say die.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?